All right, hey there. This video is going to be about cognitive learning theory. All right, so this idea is trying to figure out from a cognitive perspective, we look at how we process information, what is it that's going on as we learn something new for the first time. Okay, so there are certain principles here, and each principle kind of like builds on the next one. Right, so as we have one, the next one is going to play into that as well. So first and foremost, when we look at it, learning and development depend on our experiences, right? And so you can't learn something that's never been presented to you. If you never had that experience, then there's no opportunity for learning to take place. So first and foremost, learning and develop depend on the experiences that we actually have in life. From there, we want to make sense of those experiences. We want to properly understand what is actually happening around us, right? And so this is kind of where we get into like maybe even like the scientific method, right? So you observe something that you don't understand, you come up with a hypothesis that you think explains what is that you saw, and you go out and test it and see if you're right. This is kind of what we're looking at here. We have experiences, we want to make sense of those experiences, and so what we're going to do is then try and construct knowledge in order to make sense of what's happening. All right, so that's like coming up with the hypothesis. Now, this is where things can kind of go wrong. All right, so a lot of times we might develop a misconception about something. We might misunderstand something because it makes sense to us, right? Intuitively, this is what makes sense, even if it's not correct. And so from teaching and learning, the difficulty is ensuring that students learn accurately. Right? So the problem, though, is that even though we present information to them, if it doesn't make sense, they will process it differently and potentially construct the incorrect knowledge. Right? So they're not remembering or learning what we want them to. And so part of helping students construct knowledge appropriately is providing good quality examples. Right? And so the things that can have direct impact, the things that are more relatable and understandable to them, and starting with the most stereotypical examples as well. The more we can do that, the more explanations we can provide, we can hopefully rule out some of these misconceptions, right? Anything that's going to help promote deeper learning, or potentially what we can also see is that there's any kind of interaction. Right, so it's making sense to me, but here I am working with little Billy and little Johnny, and they're coming up with something completely different. So it's almost questioning myself, am I wrong or are they wrong? Right, so we have an opportunity to kind of see where the misconceptions may be taking place. Right, but yes, we're going to construct knowledge to make sense of our experience. Now, as we construct that knowledge, we base that on what we already know. Right? So anything that we've had in our life prior to that, any learning that is taking place, we usually use that as the basis to construct future knowledge. And this is also where misconceptions can happen based on the individual experiences that we've had up until that point. Right? So for example, if we look at the simple sentence, food comes from plants. Right? Food comes from plants. What does that sentence mean to you? Right? So if you're a student whose parents have a garden in the backyard, and they're constantly working in that garden to grow fruits and vegetables. When you hear that phrase, food comes from plants, that's what you're thinking of. You're thinking of the actual plants in the ground, and that's where we get the fruits and vegetables. Whereas if you have a parent that works in a factory that makes food, right, that cans things up, when you hear food comes from plants, that's what you may think of instead. You may think of a factory line and all the food coming out in the jars and the cans and everything like that. Both of those can be correct. So it really depends on what we already know. What are the experiences and understanding that we have of the world, and how that's going to influence the future knowledge construction that we're going to have going forward. Okay. Another thing that we're going to see is that if we look at long-term knowledge acquisition, right, that is going to be largely based on practice, right? So the more we can do something, the stronger those pathways in the brain can be reinforced and fortified, and it makes learning easier. Right? So there's a popular idea out there in that in order to become an expert or highly skilled in any area, you have to put 10,000 hours in. Right? So 10,000 hours. So if we try to think of a job that you may have, a full-time job, 40 hours a week, let's say 50 weeks a year, because you have 2 weeks for a vacation potentially. How many years is it going to take in order for you to become a highly skilled or quote-unquote expert at that particular thing? Right? So if it's a job, if it's learning to play a musical instrument like the piano or the violin, right, putting the time in. Right? And so that's just a rough idea, but 10,000 hours. That's the general rule that a lot of people propose. And then kind of like we mentioned before, social interactions a lot of times help us construct that knowledge, because we're able to see how other people are understanding it, and that might show misunderstandings that we're having and how we can overcome those misconceptions. Right? The other thing to kind of remember, it was briefly mentioned, as far as we don't necessarily directly acquire knowledge from other people, right? It's not like we can just, you said it, I immediately understood it, and I took it word for word, and it was a direct kind of transfer. That doesn't really happen, okay? So, I mean, I always think of like The Matrix. Have you ever seen the movie The Matrix? He just gets plugged into a computer, and they can just download all this knowledge, information, and skills, and he can wake up and say, hey, I know Kung Fu. He didn't have to go into the dojo to practice. He didn't have to put the time, the 10,000 hours in. It was just, boom, button press, you got it downloaded, and now you have it. Knowledge construction doesn't work that way, right? So there is a phrase that wisdom can't be taught, right? So wisdom can't be taught or can't be told. So I, through my own experiences in life, have hopefully gained knowledge, insight, and wisdom into why certain things are the way they are. I can tell you that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you will understand it, fully appreciate it, or even accept it. Sometimes you have to have those same experiences for yourself, or based on your previous experiences, you might have a different understanding. Right? So the idea that wisdom can't be told, there is some merit to it in that sometimes we have to have those experiences for ourselves. And as we have those experiences, we construct that knowledge.